that you are who you are, it's signing that URL. So you're sending a signed URL, which is nothing more than a whole bunch of crazy characters. We'll see that in a second. We retrieve it, and this is pretty straightforward. We can just, open the URL, read it, and decode it. Decode solves the UTF-8 thing, makes it all so that data is a real string and it's in Unicode internally. Now we can actually get the headers. Remember I told you earlier that URL open bypasses the headers, but it's stored them for later. And we can say, hey, give me back those headers. And that gives us back a dictionary of headers. And the headers, if you go all the way back, are a bunch of key value pairs. Key : value in the headers. And in Twitter, if you read the documentation, there's this x-rate limit remaining that tells you each time it returns to the API, response to the API call that you made, it says, look, you've got 12 left. You've got 11 left. You've got 10. So you can print that out. So this prints out how many you've got left. Then we parse the JSON data. We're going to print it so we can debug it. This dump to string and then printed. Indent equals 4. This is called pretty printing. And it's indenting things really nicely so that you can make more sense of it. Whereas when these things are when programs are talking to each other, they don't really make the output look particularly pretty. And then if we're going to go through, we have the outer thing of users, and we're going to print out the screen name and go grab for each user and users, we're going to print their screen name, we're going to grab their status text and print that out. And so this is what that data looks like. Kind of chopped a bit. So the thing we get is an outer layer, we get users, and then we get a list. And here's the first user. Now if you look at the actual data, it's much larger than this. Here's a second user, and then we have status text, and the screen name. Right? And so those are the bits that we're extracting from that. If you look, we are going to grab the screen name, we're going to grab the status text, and away you go. So you can start with this, but you realize that once you're looking at this and you're printing this out with pretty printing, you can sort of work your way in, knowing that it's either a dictionary or a list. If it's a dictionary, you look up the key. If it's a list, you say which position it is, and then you get more dictionaries within dictionaries within dictionaries, and away you go. And so this code actually, when it runs, it prints out the screen name and then that status and the next person. So it's my first 5, in that case, my first 5 friends and their most recent status, the first 5 people. Now, let's talk a little bit about how the security works. And so you have to go to the website. You have to have a Twitter account. You can't talk to Twitter API without a Twitter account. And then you go to this website and then you set up a key. You say, I'm going to build an application that is going to consume the Twitter API. And then you go in, you have to work through, there's documentation on how all this stuff works. You set up an API key, you set the application. So I made a key called Python on my laptop. And it gives us some values. It gives us a consumer key, a consumer secret, a token key, and a token secret. And you get to regenerate these. And there's this file called hidden.py, and you edit them and copy and paste all the stuff from those pages, those 4 values, into these strings. Now, if you download my code, I don't have my keys in there. I got some placeholders for this stuff. So you got to get to this web page that's on Twitter, copy these things in, and then the TWURL code will start to work. It uses a technology called OAuth, which is a way to sign a URL in a way that proves that you have the key and the secret and the tokens, but and it can't be modified in the middle. So once you send this URL, they can check the key and the secret to make sure that you truly signed it without actually sending the key and the secret. It's actually kind of cool and fascinating, but we won't go into it in great detail here. And so if you look at the code in twurl.py, this is the code that does it. It actually pulls in an OAuth library. That hidden.py, that is that code that you've got. And it's got the consumer key, the consumer secrets. This is pulling that from hidden.py. This is a lot of stuff that's using this OAuth library. Don't worry too much about that. Eventually it produces a URL that looks like this. And what happens is this was the base URL you were told to use. Then you have count equals 2 and screen name equals Dr. Chuck. Those parts are your parameters to that web service call. And then all this OAuth stuff is produced by this OAuth code in the consumer key and the secret. What happens is the key gets sent, and the secret does not get sent, but they send the signature, which is based on the secret. And then what it does is it rechecks the signature on the far end. Signature is a long string, by regenerating the signature, because the secret's available to both you to generate the signature and to them to check the signature. So it's kind of like a hash, etc., etc. You don't have to worry about all this. These URLs get really long, and your values that you need are in, the name of the URL is in, and you call this routine. It's called augment. That takes a URL and then parameters and then augments it by adding all this OAuth stuff. And so that's why it's called augment, to augment the URL. And once you got this set up and hidden working, then you sort of just augment the URL and then hit it. Now, if you don't have the right keys or secrets, or you don't have an account on Twitter, then it's going to blow up. But if you get it set up, you will be able to talk to the Twitter API with this. So this whole web services section, we've done quite a bit of stuff, right? We've looked at how, instead of reading HTML or flat text, we are creating structured data according to contracts, whether it be XML or JSON. We can retrieve and parse that information in a deterministic way. We talked about schemas that define the contracts so that you know if the data you're getting is wrong, you can know who to blame because the schema gets violated. And we've played with APIs where you're talking to someone else who's defining what the rules are and how to read their documentation. And even if they have an API key or need signed URLs, showed a little bit about how to do that. We're doing some code, sample code, playing through with some sample code samples. And you can get this by downloading it. I've got this whole thing downloaded, and I've got all the files here. And these are the files we're going to play with today. Today what we're going to do is talk about the Twitter API. And the one thing we got to learn about the Twitter API is we have to authorize ourselves. And so we have to make sure that we have a Twitter account, and then we get some keys. And so in this particular application, if you want to duplicate what I'm doing, you have to go to apps.twitter.com, click this Create New Application button, and then get some codes. Okay, and the codes show up as soon as you hit this button and then one more button, which I'm not going to do on screen. And so what happens is there are 4 codes that you've got to put in this file, hidden.py. The consumer key, the consumer secret, the token key, and token secret. These are just messed up, so I'll show you how this works and blows up if first, and then I'll put my keys in here without showing you. But basically, this is a little file you got to edit, or these Twitter ones don't work. You'll see what happens. So the first one I'm going to do is do the simplest one of all, and that is I call this thing Twitter test, and it just is going to go ask for the user timeline, and we can take a look at this, and we're going to take the URL, and we're going to augment the URL. This is the base. We found this looking at the Twitter API documentation. We're going to pass a parameter of screen name Dr. Chuck and a count of 2, so this is just a Python dictionary. And augment comes from this little bit of code called TWURL. And this uses a bit of code called OAuth, which is built into Python as well. Right? Yeah, that's built into Python as well. And it augments the URL, and it takes the key, the secret, the token key, and does a thing and signs it, and then makes this big, long, ugly URL, which you will soon see. And does this, it's a signature of the URL. So we pass this data back and forth to Twitter with a signature, and then they recheck the signature, and it's a digital signature that knows that this URL came from a program that knows the key, secret, and token secret. And so this augment basically is something that I wrote. TWURL augment is something I wrote to make it easier to add all these OAuth parameters. And you feed this code by putting your data into hidden.py. Lots of people get this to work, so don't worry, it's kind of cool when you finally get it to work. So let's take a look at what it does, just know that this makes an awesome URL that does all the security. And we'll see one of those URLs. So ignore the certificate errors. This has to do with the fact